Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. Welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. In today's episode and next episodes, we're going to explore the power of language and metaphors to help us navigate through life's most challenging moments. I'm going to choose a couple of metaphors that are often used in relation to grief and trauma, and we're looking at how these perspectives can help you navigate your loss and your trauma. So as I said, I've chosen 10 of the most used metaphors, those that are used a lot of the time. So I'm going to summarize them today at the beginning, and then we're going to look at each one separately and next time as well. So one often used is grief as an ocean. So imagine grief is like an ocean, vast and overwhelming with waves and varying intensity that can suddenly surge or recede unexpectedly. The second metaphor that is often used is the darkness of grief. It might often be seen as traversing a dark tunnel where the way forward feels uncertain and there's a light at the end sometimes, although faint, and it promises eventually clarity or hope. Another one which is very often used is grief as a journey. So experiencing grief is often described as a journey signifying a path one must travel, complete with detours, obstacles, and moments of profound discovery. In that, I have a bit of a caveat because a journey sounds like there's an end to it, and we would have to define what would that look like, the end of grief. The next one often used is the weight of grief, because we often refer to as grief feeling like carrying a heavy burden, like an invisible load that impacts daily life, which might gradually lighten as the healing progresses. You might have seen my metaphor using the grief crystal, which I'll link in the show notes. Then the fifth metaphor I've chosen is the seasons of grief. Grief is frequently compared to changing seasons with each phase, like winter, spring, summer, fall, representing different emotional states and the cyclical nature of healing. The next one is the wound of grief. It's often likened to a wound that, while initially raw and painful, gradually heals over time, but leaving a scar that serves as a reminder of loss and resilience. Then the seventh metaphor is one that might have been less used or you might not have heard. It's the dance of grief. Grief can be envisioned as a dance characterized by movements that are sometimes smooth and at other times awkward, reflecting the unpredictable rhythm of human emotions. Then the eighth metaphor is grief as a cake. You can imagine grief as a cake with different layers or different pieces. So each layer or piece represents a different emotions and the stages of grief, maybe those reflecting Elizabeth Kubler's process from sadness to anger, acceptance and hope, or meaning, imagining that as one might savor or struggle through each of the layers or pieces of the cake, also understanding that individuals navigate these layers uniquely and at their own pace. One that I most recently came across is the grief as a language. And I really like that. So it's about learning to live with grief can be compared to learning a new language. At first it feels foreign and challenging to understand, but with time you become more fluent, and the aim is to become fluent. And this new language allows you to express your deeper emotions and connect with others who also speak the same language of loss. And then the last one, which is one that I most often use, is grief as a foreign country. So I imagine that once you experience a significant loss, you are visiting a foreign country, one that you are very unfamiliar with, and it's disorienting. You had never actually wanted to visit that country, but you're here and you have no choice than to be here. The customs and landscapes, even the simplest activities seem strange and challenging. And with time, depending on how you go about learning to understand this country, you will start to get your bearings and learn the lay of the land, find your way. And often with the help of newfound companions who also understand your journey. So today we're going to explore some of these metaphors and next week the rest. because metaphors can play a vital role in understanding and expressing the myriad feelings associated with grief, offering a perspective and also solace and the sense of shared experience. So let's start with the ocean of grief. Imagine your grief as a vast ocean, stretching as far as the eye can see. And this ocean is deep with layers of emotions hidden beneath the surface. Sometimes the waves are calm, gently lapping at the shore, bringing moments of peace and tranquility. And at other times they surge and crash with overwhelming intensity, representing those moments when grief feels all-consuming and inescapable. The tides of the ocean are unpredictable. They can change without warning, much like a sudden memory or a feeling that can wash over you unexpectedly. There are also undercurrents, like in the ocean, the steady force that may not always be visible but is constantly present, affecting the way you navigate your grief. And just like the ocean, your grief comes in waves, unexpected, sporadic, and varying in intensity. And my personal experience with that is that over the years, in my case it's coming up to 13 years, the waves have definitely become less in intensity in general. Not to say that at some point it overwhelms me in intensity that I wouldn't have expected, but also the time between waves has increased. These waves are a natural part of the grieving process, and accepting that can help you ride through each wave, knowing that calmer waters will eventually follow. It's important to remember that it's okay to feel the full spectrum of emotion. Allow yourself to be carried by these waves. Understand that each brings you closer to eventually healing and accepting what is. And just as sailors learn to navigate the treacherous waters by understanding the ocean's rhythm, you too will learn to navigate your grief with time and patience. You might recognize that even in the midst of the stormiest seas there is hope and a promise of calmer waters ahead. So what are the benefits of the ocean of grief metaphor? One is like visualization of emotional waves. It illustrates that unpredictable nature of grief, helping you see that emotions come like waves and ebb and flow. Then the second one is like the normalization of this oscillation between calm and tumultuous emotional states. The third one is the recognition of its depth. We acknowledge the depth and complexity of grief and all the emotions that are associated with loss, and validating the profound experience of the griever and those grieving the significant loss of a loved one. Another benefit is the encouragement of patience. We understand that emotions come in waves, and that can encourage patience, reminding you that even in the most overwhelming feelings, that also they will eventually subside and giving way to calmer waters. And also it's understanding that it's a shared experience, and it can foster a sense of connection with others who've experienced similar waves of grief, and hopefully reducing the feelings of isolation. Let's have a look at the darkness of grief metaphor. You can think of yourself in a dark tunnel where the way forward feels uncertain and almost insurmountable. Yet far in the distance there's a glimmer of light, and this hope symbolizes that even in your darkest moments there's a path forward. Trust that with each step you take you're moving closer to clarity and peace. In this metaphor, the surrounding darkness represents the depth of sadness and feelings of being lost that are often accompanying grief. The tunnel's length is unknown, reflecting the unpredictable duration of the grieving process. Each step you take within the tunnel is significant, no matter how small it may seem. The light at the end serves as a beacon, guiding you towards eventually understanding and accepting that which is. It's important to acknowledge that the journey through the tunnel is not linear. You might find yourself taking steps forwards and then moments later feeling as though you're being pulled back. This fluctuation is natural in grief, a natural part of the whole process. And support from loved ones can act as a lifeline, maybe like a torch or like a rope along the tunnel's edge, reassuring and helping you to stay oriented towards the light. Remember, the presence of the light means that you are not completely engulfed by darkness. It's a reminder that change, healing, and hope are possible, no matter how distant they may seem. So allow yourself the grace to move at your own pace, understanding that each step, no matter how challenging, is a step toward healing. And here, really, the support of your peers, those who have experienced grief, can really help, those who are just a few steps further ahead. So what are the benefits of the darkness of grief metaphor? So for example, emphasis on hope by focusing on the light at the end of the tunnel. It emphasizes that there is hope and clarity ahead, even if it feels distant. There's also the validation of uncertainty. It acknowledges that uncertainty and fear accompany grief. It's normal to feel disoriented, and often this being a daunting experience. It also is an encouragement of persistence, like the idea of moving step by step through a dark tunnel encourages persistence, reinforcing the notion that each small step is a progress towards healing. But also the reality of setbacks. Like as I was saying, you can move forward, but the next day you feel like you're pulled back. This again is a normal part of grief. And then the importance of your support network. As I said, it's important to have those who support you, symbolically acting as torches that guide you along, or like a rope at the edge of the tunnel. The third one is grief as a journey. This is often used and is a profound metaphor. You can visualize your grief as a long, winding road that stretches into the horizon, filled with unexpected detours, hurdles, and breathtaking moments of wonder. This journey is not a race, but a personal expedition, where the destination is your own understanding, healing, and growth. As you embark on this path, you may encounter days that feel like an uphill climb, where each step taken requires immense effort. There will be moments when you might feel like you're wandering aimlessly through an endless desert. During such times, it's essential to acknowledge your feelings, allowing yourself the grace to pause and rest. Along the way, you will also find oases of comfort and support. The companionship of others or loved ones, others who might have experienced grief as well, but also loved ones with their wisdom gleaned from the shared experience. These moments serve as waypoints, guiding you through the rough terrain and reminding you that you are not alone. Remember that with every twist and turn, every smooth passage, and every obstacle, they are all integral parts of your journey. Embrace these experiences, understand that they are molding you, strengthening you, and leading you towards a new chapter of healing. Just as a journey shapes a traveler, your path through grief is sculpting a more nuanced, empathetic, and resilient version of you. Ultimately, the journey of grief is uniquely yours. It unfolds at your own pace, sometimes slow and meandering, and other times swift and tumultuous. Trust in the process and in your ability to navigate through it. Maybe with help, maybe on your own. Knowing that with each step, no matter how small, it will bring you closer to healing and acceptance. So what are the benefits of grief as a metaphor? So there's a framework of progress here. Viewing grief as a journey provides a structural framework, helping individuals understand that grief involves movement and progression over time. I want to put a caveat into that because a journey usually has an end to it. And with grief, I find that challenging for people to think that at some point it finishes, because we would have to define really what the end point looks like. But another benefit is the acceptance of pace. It emphasizes that the journey is unique to each person, allowing individuals to set their own pace without feeling pressure to move on. It also allows encouragement to reflect, to rest and highlight the importance of self-care and introspection along the way. One benefit that I really like is the recognition of growth, and it's often referred to as post-traumatic growth. This journey metaphor underscores this personal growth and discovery, suggesting that navigating grief can lead to profound insights and resilience. And many, many stories, and my clients told these stories, show that this is, in a lot of people's experience, the truth. But also the benefit would be celebrating of milestones. It allows to reinforce that every bit of progress, every move, no matter how minor, is a significant step forward towards healing, whatever that might mean. Another metaphor often used is the weight of grief. I'm sure you've ever felt like grief is a heavy burden, because the weight of grief helps illustrate this feeling. You can imagine carrying an invisible load, one that affects every facet of your day-to-day life. From the moment you wake up, it's there, pressing down on your chest, making even the simplest task feel daunting. As you go through your day, this weight influences your interactions, decisions, and perceptions, casting a shadow over everything. Over time, it would support this weight will lighten, allowing you to move more freely and with less strain. Connecting with loved ones, seeking therapy, and finding healthy outlets for expression can all contribute to making this load more manageable. The key is to recognize and honor the heaviness while understanding that it can and will lift. Even on the days when it feels unbearable, know that it's a temporary state, one that signifies the depth of your loss and love. So for me, I use that metaphor in the form of a grief crystal, and I'm going to link one of the stories that I made on Instagram. But basically my grief crystal is like a rose quartz that I have here on my desk. Actually, I have two, and one is a little bit bigger and a bit more edgy. But the edges of this grief crystal represents the sharp bits that sting, and the weight in my hand, or the feeling in my hand, represents the legacy that I keep for the rest of my life. And for me, I wouldn't actually say that the weight gets lighter, but actually I get more used to carrying it. My muscles adapt to the weight. So what are the benefits of the weight of grief metaphor? So for example, one of them, it provides a tangible visualization for grief's impact, helping those grieving understand that they might feel physically and emotionally burdened. It's actually grief has been seen as running a marathon daily, so that weight of the grief is in that metaphor as well. It also, people can relate to the sense of carrying a heavy load, making this metaphor easily understandable and relatable. But it also gives permission to seek help. Like when a weight gets too heavy, you ask someone to help you carry it. Whether that be therapy or support groups or peer group or a loved one. It also helps validate the pain in terms of the weight, because grief is an intense and overwhelming experience. And so acknowledging this real and tangible impact in a daily life is what the weight does. But also a gradual relief. As I said with the grief crystal, I get used to carry its weight. In this metaphor, you can also imagine that the weight will become lighter, whatever fits for you, offering hope for gradual improvement and healing. And the last metaphor for today is the seasons of grief. And you might have heard of that, like the changing season. Imagine your grief as an entire year filled with ebb and flow of different weather conditions and temperatures. Like winter can be harsh and isolating, mirroring the cold numbness and solitude that often accompanies the initial stage of raw grief. And during these times you may feel as though you'll never find warmth and solace again. However, just as winter gradually gives way to spring, your emotional state will begin to thaw, bringing with it movement of renewal and new beginnings. In spring, you might experience the first shoot of hope and the budding of new emotions. There can also be a sense of rebirth or rejuvenation as life slowly starts to regain color and vibrancy. Spring is also time for transformation and growth, where initial pain and sorrow begins to evolve into a more manageable and hopeful state. And I want to put in that doesn't mean that your grief will last a year and then it will be over, but it's just in terms of the season, doesn't have to be a year in total. Summer, on the other hand, offers warmth and light. During this season, you might find yourself basking in moments of joy and peace, feeling more connected to yourself and others. You might imagine this as a period of when the dark clouds of grief seem to have lifted, at least temporarily, allowing the sun to shine through. But also there's the odd summer shower or summer storm. But you may discover that you're able to engage more fully with the world around you again, savoring some of the simpler pleasures of life. So as summer transitions into fall, you might be reflecting on the transition to become the focus. Fall is the time for introspection, allowing you to process your journey and the changes that have occurred. Falling of the leaf symbolizes the shedding of layers, letting go of some of the more painful aspects of grief, while retaining the essential memories and lessons. This season encourages you to honor your past while preparing for the future. So you can imagine embracing each season, knowing that they are cyclical in nature and temporary. Just as the seasons change without fail, so too will your emotional landscape and continue to evolve. And each season brings with it its own challenges as gifts, contributing to the intricate tapestry of your grief journey. By recognizing and accepting these natural cycles, you can better navigate your emotions and maybe finding a sense of balance and eventual healing, whatever that healing might look like. You can imagine that your emotional landscape will continue to change and offer new beginnings as each season plays its part in the broader spectrum of your healing. So what are the benefits of the seasons of grief metaphor? First of all, the cyclical understanding helps you to see and understand grief as this cyclical process with phases that naturally ebb and flow, similar to the ocean, but also much like the seasons. But also the acceptance of change. By comparing grief to the seasons, it normalizes the very emotional states that inevitability will change. But also hope for renewal. The transition from winter to spring, with its metaphor, provides a powerful symbol of hope and renewal, signifying that the harshest periods of grief will eventually give way to new beginnings, new blossoms. Many cultures also have traditions tied to seasonal changes, making this metaphor widely resonant and easily accessible, and it encourages individuals to be patient with themselves and understand that each season of grief has its own time and purpose. So next week we are going to look at the rest of the metaphors as I was explaining in the beginning. The next one will be the wound of grief, then the dance of grief, grief as a cake, grief as a language, and grief as a foreign country. So I hope that with each of these metaphors, you will gain a different understanding of how you can deal and live with your grief, reminding you that while your experience is deeply personal, you are not alone. And I'm hoping that some of these perspectives will help you find your hope, your resilience, and ultimately some form of healing. Thank you for listening. Take care. Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.